Okay, so I think we'll make a start there. It's 1:10. I'm pretty sure more people will start joining as the minutes go by. But this session is being recorded, so if anybody obviously misses the start or crucial things, they can hear afterwards. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining this BioSafe session. So we've got an excellent panel lined up. And we've also got, as you should have seen on some of the joining instructions, we have a Slido page where you can ask questions, and I invite you all to ask questions. And we will also have a mural board. So I'd just like to share my screen just for a moment, just to show you what that's all about. So that you'll find the link in the chat box, and what we invite yourselves and companies is just create a little post-it note, which is relatively intuitive with just clicking and typing, for your companies and essentially your ideas for future technologies here. So I kind of just want to leave that going on in the background and not to stare at it too much. And secondly, the Slido page for asking your questions is available. And we've already got some very interesting points up there. So I guess I'm Reese. I work for the Aerospace Technology Institute, and I'm kind of hosting this session. I guess instead of doing an injustice to all of our expert panel, I'd like to just go around and ask you guys to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. So I just go around based on how I can see you. So David Morgan from EasyJet, if you'd just like to, just for 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is David Morgan. I'm the Director of Operations for EasyJet, and I've been involved extensively with the recovery program in terms of getting the aircraft back in the sky post our lockdown over the summer period. So delighted to be here today and looking forward to some good discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Brian?
Hi everyone. My name is Brian St. Rock. I am the Engineering Director of Advanced Technologies and Laboratories for the Interiors business at Collins Aerospace. Collins Aero is one of the major business units of Raytheon Technologies, formerly United Technologies, just to provide some context. I've been at Raytheon for 15 years. I've spent a lot of time at our research center, United Technologies Research Center, developing and advancing new technologies and capabilities. And since March of this year, I've also been the engineering focal for the interiors portion of our Collins Confident to Fly task force. We've been engaging with industry, supporting industry really in areas related to cabin cleaning and hygiene. So also very excited to be part of the panel and looking forward to the conversation over the next hour.
Thank you, Brian. Jan from ICF.
Hi everyone, so Jan Cambier from ICF. So ICF, like the division for which I work, we are aviation consultants. So we do operational transformation and also like a market strategy. And for the purpose of this panel, we're currently doing a study for ATI where we are mapping like the end-to-end air travel system. So what happens to the passengers, what happens to the ground crew, what happens to the cabin crew, and to identify like the risk area within the end-to-end air travel systems and what are the technologies that are relevant to minimize virus transmission.
Thank you, Jan. Ian Kerr, Honeywell.
Thanks, Reese. My name is Ian Kerr. I'm a program manager for advanced technologies within Honeywell in the UK. My main work is focusing on environmental control systems for aircraft. So the ventilation system that's bringing the air into the cabin and recirculating it around. We're, as an organization, Honeywell are focused on bringing new innovation to how we manage the cabin environment and how we kind of maximize the customer experience and minimize the operational cost of that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Ian. And then Ben, last but not least.
Oh yes, hello, hello, Reese. Thanks ever so much. Yeah, I work with Counterpoint Market Intelligence, which is basically a research and report writing analyst company. We do real research. In other words, we actually talk to airlines, we talk to the supply base, we talk to OEMs while we're doing all of our research, and then we at the end of usually the end of October, November, we actually do a report on interiors which is about a combination of about 4 months' work. And we issue a full-blown 500-page plus report on aircraft interiors. My background, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in the aerospace industry since I left school. I've been in interiors just under 40 years. Actually, it's 39 years to be exact. So I've been around in manufacturing and doing all sorts of things within this particular industry. So that's my background.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you everybody for that overview of your backgrounds. So what I'd quite like to do is just facilitate kind of a conversation between the questions that have been submitted and then the challenge statements that are on the mural board. So I'd like to kick off with one that is relevant for pretty much everybody, which is, are face masks for air travelers here to stay? And the question, is that going to be forever? So I think I'll start with David, I guess, from the operator's perspective.
Yeah, so it's a good question, isn't it? And, you know, I think that when you're considering the layers of mitigations against COVID on board an aircraft, then you do need this sort of layered approach, and masks are a very visible sign that you have taken some action, you know, as an airline, and a relatively straightforward one at that. It doesn't require modification to the aircraft or anything else. So I think I cannot see at the moment any situation where masks would disappear anytime soon, certainly not until, you know, the virus is completely under control. They're not without their problems, I have to say. And, you know, when you're dealing with large numbers of passengers, you will always get a population of them that don't want to wear a mask. And so then you're sort of faced with a challenging situation. Is, do you just deny them boarding? And, you know, we've had some very uncomfortable cases where, you know, passengers have got very excited, to put it politely, about having to wear a mask. And then you've got people who, of course, through medical reasons, can't wear a mask because they've got asthma or something where, you know, it's not advisable for them to do that. And in those situations, you can either just say, okay, well, come on board and you know, that's fine, you don't wear a mask. Or you can go to an extreme case, as some airlines have done in the United States, where they say, well, air travel is not for you. We're very sorry that you can't wear a mask and sorry about your condition, but travel at the moment is not, we can't social distance on the aircraft, and therefore, if you can't wear a mask, you can't travel, period. Now, I think that a lot of countries haven't adopted quite that strict approach. But we are finding that we probably need to go a step a bit tougher than we do at the moment, which is basically take people's word for it, whether or not they're exempt the mask or not, because the rest of the traveling public expect people to be wearing masks nowadays. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I think they're here to stay for some time yet, you know, for those reasons.
Okay, thanks for that. It's rather clear. I guess, Jan, based on your research you've been doing, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think like France is going to be between short haul and long haul. So clearly, like I think for short haul, they're here to stay, and like there is not, in the majority of cases, there is no issue for people to wear a mask for a couple of hours. I think for long haul, it's going to be problematic, and like long haul travel is expected to recover like slower than short haul, but it's going to be difficult to expect people to wear a mask for 6 hours or 8 hours. So yeah, for long haul, there will be a need to find alternative solutions.
Okay, so just a fairly clear distinction there between short and long haul. I guess the length of the flight and willingness to wear a face mask. I guess the rest of the panel have any strong comments on that? There are other questions more on sort of technology and cabins that are likely to be more appropriate. But
well, there's probably two ways, Reese, to look at this. Is that there is an opportunity there to develop a mask that is actually capable for everybody to wear. So there is a shield, of course. You could wear a shield is not going to affect in any way or couldn't actually justify. So if it does become mandatory that masks have to be used on aeroplanes, irrespective whether it's long haul, short haul, there are solutions that can be given to passengers. But you know, we've got it in England at the moment that, you know, there are some people that won't even, or it's mandatory to wear a mask when you go into shops, but some people aren't doing that. So I think an airline, if it's mandatory, an airline is able to refuse entry to the aircraft if the person is not doing what's required. So, you know, I think the opportunities are there to develop mask technology that can be used and worn by all parties.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I think, you know, Dave mentioned sort of like near term, long term. So in the near term, layers of protection are critical, you know, in terms of how we approach this, and obviously a mask is a very effective. I think in this case, we can take guidance from the other, you know, industries that, or the other, you know, our normal life, right? Like what's mandated when we go to restaurants or go to shops or go to stores. And so in the near term, until we get this under control, I think masks are essential, actually. And I do think they're here to stay in the near term because of that reason. In the longer term, I think we'll see a trend more towards a new normal. And I do think a new normal will actually include just an uptick in people that, you know, there's certain regions in the world today already that wear masks, right? Even in when we're not in a global health crisis. So I think the new normal will kind of reduce back down to a different baseline as far as mask wearing, even post COVID, even after it's under control.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I guess just want to make a comment to everybody who's now joined. We've obviously got a lot more participants now. There is a Slido page for you to ask questions and vote on questions. You should find the link in the chat window on Microsoft Teams. And we also have a mural page, which you can post your particular technology ideas. So Ian, there's definitely a question here that's on your area of expertise. So we've got, how effective really is air filtration and HEPA filters on conventional aircraft against fighting virus transmission? So I guess you're heavily involved in this space.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is that they're very, very effective. You know, the filtration on an aircraft is of a very high quality. It's maintained in a systematic, as indeed all components on an aircraft are maintained in a systematic manner. Whereas, you know, you'll find in the built environment, let's say that, you know, it's not uncommon for parts and maintenance to be an afterthought. It's very much built into the culture of aviation that, you know, we use fully compliant parts and they're in place within their service life, which has been very, very heavily tested. So, you know, the filters that we have on our systems, they're, you know, 5 nines effective in removal of viruses, and that includes, you know, viruses of the size and type of, you know, coronavirus. So it's, you know, in that regard, it's a very, very safe environment from the air perspective. But of course, it is also an environment, as we said earlier, you know, that it's difficult to socially distance. You know, you've got a lot of other issues, and of course, you also have to deal with how people perceive and feel about these things. You know, perceptions are a very big thing, and you know, as David said earlier, people want to wear masks, and people want to see everybody else wearing masks. Then people will be wearing masks, and that's, you know, that's not a reflection of what the air quality or the filtration quality is. It's a perception of how we all feel about, you know, tackling this awful situation with the pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Ian. So it's quite good. You're highlighting there that the system may be very effective, but the public perception of that system is something slightly different. Does any of the other panel want to comment on sort of air filtration?
I've got a question actually for Ian on the HEPA filters.
Yeah,
obviously,
go for it.
Been something that we have made a big deal of as part of our campaign to get people confident about flying again. But when it concerns the air nozzles and the direction of the airflow from the overhead panel, is there perhaps an optimum setting, a position for those nozzles to be in order to maximize the protection you are getting. And I think the answer is that nobody really knows at the moment, but I think it would be an interesting area to explore if the nozzles were fixed in a vertical position, say, or at a particular angle. Would that present any greater benefit than it does at the moment, where they could be all over the place? So I just throw that out as a question, as perhaps a simple improvement in what we have.
I think that it's something that let's just say perhaps we should talk sort of offline regarding those sort of areas, but it's something that we've considered. I guess to throw the question back, how controllable would it be? You know, I'd quite like to have control over that gasper over my head when I sit down on the aircraft, and you know, I might want it a little bit colder than somebody else who's in the adjacent seat, and I want a bit more ventilation blowing on my face, etc. It's kind of like, you know, it's part of the personalization of air travel, which we're moving towards. It seems a sort of retrograde step if we're moving away from it in this regard.
I think the only thing is you could perhaps advise passengers that your optimum protection will be obtained if your nozzle is in the vertical position, say, for example, and you then give them the choice as to whether they want to go for optimum or something else.
Yeah.
Could I just interrupt there? There is another question actually on the concept of the air shield. So I don't know if you've all seen this concept of, you know, like you're suggesting, David, the air nozzles being fixed such that you're protected by an air shield. So the question is that effective and is it implementable? I guess, I don't know, Brian, have you got any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, I think the whole concept of, you know, we've been talking about layers. I think you know, there's the air filtration, the recirculation, there's touch. There's a lot of things to consider in an environment like an aircraft cabin. I think airflow and airflow management can play a significant role, obviously, in I would say airborne passenger to passenger type transmission. You know, the question is how effective I think can the air source within the secondary within the gasper system be? You know, is there enough energy to truly make an impact, to truly persist from the overhead down to where, you know, as far down as it needs to be an effective shield? I think there's an interesting topic. I think nobody, at least, you know, this is something we've looked at quite a bit at Collins. We also have an air management system business that produces and supplies environmental control systems, but I think that's an open question. I think from a retrofit standpoint, I think that's one question, and then could there be a new air distribution methodology for future aircraft? I think those are two separate topics. You know, one I think is more practical than maybe the other, but I do think airflow management can play a role and needs to be investigated.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
I think one of the things that's kind of often misunderstood with the airflow management is that the movement on the air within the cabin is very much a lateral movement, you know, longitudinal movement up and down the cabin. If you're sat in row 28 and somebody coughs in row 2, it's going down below their seat and out through the floorboards and either recirculated through a HEPA filter or dumped overboard by the system. It's not going to be coming up and down the cabin to any significant amount.
That's correct.
You know, so
That's right.
I think that's something that's not perhaps that well understood by, you know, the end users of the aircraft.
And like I guess to date, being optimistic and hoping that the IATA figures have some type of accuracy, like the level of cases who are flying are very limited. And from the discussion we've had in our study with a virologist, like his point was clear, like quite strong on the fact that unless someone coughs directly close to you and you get basically in the vicinity of someone that projects like millions of particles, like it's not one particle like going close to you that's going to make you have COVID if you're a healthy person. So is the virologist's viewpoint was that physical barrier for the people that are close to you are more relevant than anything to do with airflow, which where like the first, the air is not going to go directly to you, and second of all, the like through the ventilation, like most particles like will be diluted and therefore won't impact you. And his point for along this line is, for example, when we talk about wearing face mask outside, for him it's a nonsense because he the viewpoint is that there is so much air circulation when you're outside that any virus will be diluted in the air to an extent that it's not relevant to always being wearing a mask. So when we talk about the airplane, like physical barrier are more relevant than airflow management.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Can I just interrupt? If Les, I think you're on the line. Is it okay just to turn your camera off, just so that the panelists are seen by everybody? That's okay. Thank you. Thanks for your keenness, though. So yeah, great discussion there on cabin airflow from the system, the effectiveness, and then I guess Ben, there's a good question here to bring you in. So the question from Leslie from ADS. So in the post-COVID cabin, do we expect more cabin dividers and partitions? So I guess a general question about your thoughts on dividers.
Well, the answer to how I would answer that is actually I don't think so. I don't think, and David could actually confirm this, but I don't think any airline, no matter who you are, is going to spend money on shall we say devices in any quantity, like seat dividers or any type of unit that you might plug in between the seats or onto the seats. No airline's going to spend discretionary money on that kind of item that one, they've got to clean. And if it's perspex for a clear perspex divider and there's a smudge on that divider that has been left by the cleaner that's trying to clean it, can you imagine the mayhem that will cause, or the stress that will cause the passenger who's sitting there with a smudge on the screen? So there are more trouble than they're worth. Plus the fact the airlines that I've spoken to, they do not want to spend money on these type of devices simply because if there is a vaccine in the next 12 to 18 months and flying starts to resume, they've spent money that they didn't necessarily need to spend because they're not going to be used in longer term. So short-term fixes like that, I don't see actually being adopted by very many airlines. There might be one or two, but you're not going to get the majors doing something like that.
Okay, very clear response. I guess the immediate go-to there would be David. Sort of. Yeah. Are you in agreement there?
I absolutely agree, Ben. So discretionary spend right now for airlines is kind of non-existent. But more so than that, our passengers are actually telling us that they are not worried about the biosecurity on the aircraft at the moment. So strangely enough, the reason why passengers, or perhaps it's not strange, the reason why we've had a huge drop-off in passengers traveling is because of the quarantine restrictions, overwhelmingly. It's not about whether they feel worried about catching COVID on board the aircraft in the majority of cases. In fact, our own customer satisfaction scores on hygiene are better now than they were pre-COVID days. So provided that you explain clearly the layered approach system that we have with the HEPA filters and the surface disinfectants and the hand gels and the wearing of masks and all this kind of thing, then people are comfortable that they have a reasonable chance of not catching COVID on board. And IATA are telling us the same. In fact, this morning, the chances of getting COVID on board is deemed less than being struck by lightning, according to the statistics at least. But even if that number is not correct, it's obviously a very, very small percentage of people that seem to have caught it on board the aircraft. So we would not be spending money on expensive screens when there is no evidence to suggest that they would be welcomed by passengers, and they would certainly be a big headache for the airline.
Okay, thanks, David. It's very clear. Did any of the rest of the panel want to comment on partitions?
So like, I agree with the viewpoint that like it's unlikely to see airlines like spending money on that unless it's mandated. I guess from our research in terms of what are the effective solutions, like screens are seen as like a solution that could be effective. Like then like it comes back to what is the risk in the cabin, and the reality is the risk in the cabin is low, like very low, like as mentioned by the statistics. But like it's like if you have to do something, then screens are more relevant than a number of the other solutions talked about, like the more sophisticated. Like for example, when we talk about like coatings on materials and so on, this is less relevant than screens. But still agree that it's unlikely to be seen.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Okay, so thank you all for that. That's, I guess, relatively clear for everybody on the line. So I guess moving away from partitions, there's a few questions on other technologies. So there's a question here from Adrian from AeroCare Aviation. The question is, will the widespread deployment of far UV disinfection throughout the air transport system enable the sector to regain passenger confidence in flying? So I guess a question on the effectiveness of UV and UV systems. And I'd quite like to bring in Brian, if you have comments on that.
Yeah. So, I think of, far UV, it really is, it's active suppression, right? Like, can active suppression play a role? I think it can. Especially with lighting, there needs to be a kind of a strong focus on the human factors of it, right? The safety aspects. It's a far UV is promising. It's advancing very quickly. Quickly outpacing, I would say, there's been studies on its human safety, which I think is great. And so, but applied, I do think we'll see, active systems, but, and it kind of goes back to even the previous question about dividers. I think anything, the one in our, there's the post-COVID and how do we get out of the slump that we're in, but there can't be any solutions that fundamentally damage the economics of air travel, right? So, power consumption is something that needs to be considered. Lifetime of these devices is something that needs to be considered. So, like, and even airflow management, right? Airflow management, does that play? I don't think there's any one silver bullet. I think it needs to be a layered approach where there's incremental, cost-effective improvements across the board. So if we look at the lighting systems on board the aircraft, just to bring it back to lighting, if there's ways that we could implement or integrate some of these new lighting solutions into existing light fixtures to have them serve dual purpose, I think that'll be the most attractive from a lighting perspective. But certainly far UV is very promising and exciting, and something that I think as an industry we'll be tracking very closely.
Okay, thanks, Brian. There are quite a few questions on this UV topic, so I'm quite interested in everybody's responses on that. Does anybody want to jump in?
Well, I think localized UVC is actually a really good idea longer term anyway in laboratory modules. So you can technically sanitize the surfaces of a laboratory, which it isn't just a question of COVID. Lavatories are not, interiors of lavatories are not too great even pre-COVID. So I think the idea of bringing in UVC technology into sanitizing a lot of the touch areas and touch points in the lab is a good idea. To bring it out into the cabin, as Brian mentioned, it's not something you've got to consider any passenger around when that dangerous light is actually being utilized or used. I know Honeywell have developed a UVC cleaning devices that can go through the cabin. And so on a turnaround, that to me could be a very feasible solution to actually sanitize the aircraft. But you're only sanitizing the parts that the light actually falls on. And nobody's actually explained to me that if there is one of these little COVID germs actually living under an arm cap, that's not going to be sanitized because it's not going to see the light. So everything's got its disadvantages there, but I really do see UVC. They use a lot of it in hospitals for sanitizing surfaces, and I actually see it could be used in a lavatory module or a closed environment very effectively.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
It's not UV technology, but there's also a solution that's mainstreams and used in a lot of places to make sterile environment. It's the use of ionized device. So it's devices that cost 300 pounds, and then you could use it before boarding, and it sterilizes your environment. So that's another cheap solutions that is proven to be effective.
Okay, thank you, Jan. I guess
I think so.
Ian,
Ben was talking there about the Honeywell kind of cleaning system, and that is very effective from the test data I've seen. I'm not directly involved with that aspect of things, but it does look quite promising in terms of its ability to remove biological material or deactivate biological material within the cabin. I think we also, as Ben pointed out, there will be shadow areas where potentially, things may lurk. But then, as Jan sort of pointed out, you also need to catch more than just one virus particle in order to, become infected. And it's going to be sort of a learning process as to what technologies are there to deploy, and whether we supplement that with some ionized material or other things. There's a lot of different solutions that we can deploy as an industry, and unfortunately we don't historically have a great connection to the medical community. It's not aviation medicine was very much a thing based on fighter pilots and oxygen and pushing the human body further in that regard. We do have ongoing relationship building, although admittedly it's not the greatest time for relationship building, but it's we do need to have better relations with the medical community to understand which of these things we're actually trying to mitigate. And for initially, we're going to put in more layers than are absolutely necessary because we don't know which ones are absolutely necessary. But once we've got that, then I'm sure the pressure is going to be on David and the operational side to pare back the layers to be what is effective, and that will be a difficult process, I think. Maintain passenger confidence and build things back to what we're good at as an industry. Delivering good engineering solutions with the minimum cost and other overhead related to them.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And then I guess David would be interested to hear the operator's view on UV devices.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the science behind it, but I like the simplicity of it. I like the fact that it doesn't require complicated modifications to the aircraft or anything else. And it's a relatively understandable bit of science from a public's perspective. They know that UV light, has some properties that can, destroy, harmful things. And so I think that they would get that, and they would welcome an airline which is using UV in the right way. See if that was deemed to be as effective or more effective than using some disinfecting products that we currently use at the moment, then absolutely we would look very closely at that.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, and then I guess there's a little bit of a follow-on question about robotics, and I think it's someone clearly seen the Honeywell going down the cabin robot. So are robotic cleaning devices likely to be destined for ground use only, or may they become an in-flight addition? So I guess to start with you, David, again, I guess from an airline's perspective, not wanting to buy.
Goodness me, robotics in flight. I don't think it's going to be anything that EasyJet will be getting any time soon. Interesting idea. I'm not really familiar with even using robotics on the ground for cleaning purposes. We use robotics for inspection, and we use drones for inspecting the tails of aircraft and things like this. But probably one of the other colleagues would be better placed to answer on their use. So I'll hand back to you, Reese.
Okay. The panel have any views on robotics?
Well, only on the fact that you know, an airline, well, actually EasyJet is a typical example of an airline that needs to do a quick turn because they fly a number of sectors a day and have got to clean an aircraft very, very quickly to make profit on flying different sectors, anything up to 10 sectors a day. If you've got to lug a piece of robotic equipment down the ramp onto an aircraft and then set out the if you like, the wings of the robotic item, which is really a motorized cart with wings on it, like solar panels on either side, to actually go down the aircraft, that is going to add time to the turnaround, and that's going to be lost profit. They could lose one sector a day just on lost profit in that methodology of cleaning. So I don't see where, you know, robotics, the word robotics gives the impression that it's actually going to be faster, but I actually think it's actually going to slow things down.
I think the systems are quite, you know, one of the critical quality aspects of developing the Honeywell system was the turnaround time, you know, that it needs to fit in with operational parameters from the airlines. You know, you can't have something that's going to hold up an aircraft on the ground for a significant amount of time. It's also, I think, quite a visible thing for the public that, you know, you're queuing up, waiting to board, you can see what's happening. But I also take Ben's point, there will be, you know, issues with deployment. Obviously, not all airports are the same environment. You know, how you handle it and how you do it is going to be different place to place, from operator to operator. It's not going to be an overnight fix, but certainly it's been developed in very, very quick time, with turnaround on ground as a key parameter. I mean, I personally don't see it as a flight option because it's ultimately, what does it give you?
Exactly.
You know, whereas, you know, as Brian was saying with the lighting solutions in cabin, the kind of far UV, human-friendly UV light, you know, that sweet spot does and can be sort of engineered into the system, something that reduces microbial and virus activity and doesn't affect humans, is very desirable.
Yeah, and it's actually controllable if it was in the laboratory. A laboratory, generally speaking, would be a touch point that potentially 289 people during a flight could actually walk into and walk out of several times. So if there's a 1 minute delay before on a time lock that prevents somebody walking in there while the UVC is doing its actual cleansing function, I don't think anybody is going to say anything, and that's actually going to be very visible that, you know, you've got that cleaning aspect going on. And I think that would give confidence. If somebody's made the decision to fly, they've added up that decision of risk. It's no different as if I'm going to go to the supermarket. I'm going to take a chance to go to the supermarket. I'm going to take the decision to risk and actually fly. But when you get on board and you see that the airline's done something like UVC in the environment that I would touch, and so would other people be touching, I see that as a big benefit. And it doesn't actually, it puts cost on the aircraft, but it's not an enormous cost, and it's a beneficial long term. Because don't forget, it's not just COVID; it's also flu and other transmittable things that people can leave behind.
And biofilms on things like faucets. I completely agree. I think the technologies that'll have staying power are the ones that are solving not just a COVID problem, but a kind of a pre-COVID pain point. And I think lab cleanliness and lab sanitation is certainly you know, an area where it doesn't just address sort of this near-term, you know, health crisis, but also, you know, biofilms on faucets. You know, just cleanliness of the laboratory definitely is an area where you could see active suppression systems, you know, including not just UV, but also as was pointed out, ionization systems or other techniques as well. As far as robotics during flight, I agree with the value proposition for robotics is quality and speed, right? So if those two factors are not going to play a role in a weight and cost effective way to fly it around to transport the weight of it, it's going to be a hard sell, right, during flight. On the ground, it's clear, right? I mean, if it can increase turnaround time, right, if you can utilize robotics to make that cleaning procedure, lower the operational cost, enable faster turnaround times, then it'll find a home. I think there's also the quality aspect as well, right? If from a public confidence perspective, there's a perception that a robotic operation is consistent. It'll be more uniform. It'll be more thorough and complete. However, it cannot, to everyone's point, it can't extend turnaround times, right? It needs to actually support the airline economics, operational economics of cleaning in a business minded way.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Okay, so thanks all for that. I guess we got 2 questions here from Nick Rawlings, ever so slightly related. So on the topic of biosurveillance, so I guess it's less of a onboard technology and more of the holistic system. Is there a need for proactive biosurveillance in the future to prevent future pandemics and ensure the resilience? So does anybody want to jump in on that?
So I'll jump in just to get us started, and then we
go for it.
A point was made earlier on. I think it was Dave who made it. Part of our problem, at one point, air travel was down 96%. Part of that problem is our passengers weighing risk and benefit. But that's one component. But the other large component is, do you have is there a destination, right? So, the quarantine restrictions, the travel restrictions, these are almost probably, as or more impactful than the passenger confidence issues. So I think biodetection or biosensing, I think is going to be essential. So part of this again is COVID, and part of it is the new normal, and a 96% reduction in air travel. We need to be more resilient to global health crises than we have been during this event. And I think biodetection or bioscreening, I wouldn't call it surveillance. That seems a little shady, but biological screening, I think, is a tool that we need to have in our toolbox during times like this, that we can bring forward to allow the air travel system to remain operational during times of global health issues like this. And it could be it could be bioscreening at the passenger level, but you could also integrate bioscreening into the aircraft cabin itself. So you're not testing an individual, but you're pool testing, right? You're basically assigning a clean bill of health, not to an individual, but to an aircraft. That could enable, if that can allow us to bypass or circumvent quarantine restrictions, I think that's going to be essential to accelerating recovery of the industry. But also, in a future issue, it can also allow early management action, right? So you can, pre-symptomatic management action, locally, and possibly even reduce the depth or the severity of the pandemic by essentially testing the aircraft, not the individual. Okay,
interesting perspective. I guess Jan, I know you're looking at the whole end-to-end network. What's your thoughts?
So I guess the view we are developing through the research we're currently doing is that if you can avoid crowds and queues, that's going to be much more effective than any anything else that you can implement. So for example, like when you're in the airport, like the key issue is at which point like you have a queue of people where social distancing is does not exist anymore, and then like if someone is infected and sneeze and or cough, like suddenly there are a number of people that could get infected. So for example, like at the minute it's still happening that when you're boarding the aircraft, instead of having social distancing and only boarding when the plane is ready, like you still get put in the tunnel, and you have every single passenger queuing in the tunnel and being close to one to another. So having procedures in place and crowd management system elsewhere in the airport to avoid this type of situation will be more effective. After traveling often to Africa and Asia, there are a number of airports with like temperature check cameras, and I think you could make use of that when there are known crises. So like the cameras are there at the airport at all times, and if you know you're facing a medical crisis, then like there is a more thorough checks of passengers and so on. But yeah, in a nutshell, at the airport, I think the queue management is much more than any biosurveillance.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Anybody else have any thoughts on this notion of passenger data? And Brian, you highlight the word surveillance. It's probably not the most sensible. Or
Reece, the only thing I would say is that since the beginning of the pandemic, ICAO have been working hard to try and create a so-called public health corridors concept, where the passenger moves through this corridor, and at each stage of the journey goes through an area which is certified to a minimum standard. And they've got the daunting challenge of trying to get a global standard for airports and aircraft and crews and so on. And it's fair to say that, despite a lot of work, and we've been working with them as well, it's going to be very difficult to convince individual states to adopt a global standard when they have already perhaps laid down their own standards as a nation, particularly from the public health authorities within that state. So it's quite challenging. I do think that in order for us to be able to live with this, perhaps for a longer period of time, we will have to have a more global approach to the way that we manage the standards that are required at airports and in aircraft and so on, in order to give the confidence to governments that they don't need to be imposing very specific bilateral restrictions or whatever with countries. But once people are signed up and are certified, if you like, to a certain standard, then that is an acceptable risk for air travel. And so, yeah, holistically and part of the whole ecosystem, we can do better as a globe from that perspective, and there's still a lot of work to be done on that.
Okay, thanks, David. The global perspective and harmonizing standards, the holy grail. So thanks for that. I guess I'd like to just move away from the questions just for a moment and consider the challenge statements as part of the ATI. So I guess the first one is a challenge of measure and eradicate airborne pathogens and particulates. So I know we already spoke a little bit about air filtration, but I guess, does anybody have any comments on the future opportunities in sort of measuring and removing particulates?
Yeah, I think that's, we've got, go on, Brian.
So I was just going to, quickly say, I think, Ian covered, I think that part of the air system very well, the HEPA filter. So that already does a very, the recirculation system is already does that, I would say. I think the big challenge, the opportunity is how do you eradicate, airborne pathogens in the cabin, in an occupied cabin. I think that, we talked about surfaces, we talked about recirculation, we talked about air management. I think each one, how do we control or mitigate person-to-person transmission within the cabin, within an occupied cabin? So I think that is there's no, single, silver bullet there right now, but I do think that's an opportunity an industry challenge on how can we, without physical barriers, without physical separation that would damage the economics of air travel, how do we mitigate, intra-cabin spread? I think it's a challenge and an opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And then Ian, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say on the kind of like, air quality sensors is an area which I've been working on for a number of years now, and we do have an awful lot of test data for the actual quality of the air within the cabin. I think there's a lot of opportunities to have technologies and deploy them in a way that we improve maintenance regimes, we improve, connected maintenance is a growing area. We need to understand how that's impacting, so all of our systems are behaving, as close to optimum as we can have them at all times. And certainly from an air quality perspective, I see some interest from people who, whilst to say a smelling cabin or a fuming cabin event is not bio-related, it still is related to the overall passenger perspective and passenger experience. And if you have that sort of smell when you're on the taxiway of the exhaust fumes from the plane in front, that then sort of, sets people thinking as to, right, what is the air quality? And there are areas for, further improvement of solutions within there and, refining our offerings to the marketplace overall, whether that's through filtration or other kind of like, more active technologies. I think that so we'll still continue to see a lot of work being done on those aspects of air quality.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm fully aware that an hour is never enough to solve all these problems. Move on to the sort of second challenge statement, which is the challenge of eliminating communal touch points. So I'd quite like to bring Ben back in. I know you mentioned about lavatories at one point, the sheer number of people that are going to and fro.
And there's a lot of work being done on antimicrobial materials. So that's something that I'm trying to have a look at in detail of what that work entails. And longer term, can those antimicrobial materials be incorporated in the design of new aircraft products? So I think in terms of covers, I understand that the COVID germ or virus is 1,000th the size of a human hair, so it can live very nicely in pockets, even just cloth pockets on seats and what have you. So I think antimicrobial materials, there's a lot of growth there, a lot of opportunities to do some. If you're changing your seat covers today, then or any items within the aircraft which are rotables, then it kind of makes sense to actually look at changing them to the latest and greatest stuff that is antimicrobial. If you're looking at plastics and various other things which by inherently are antimicrobial in the main, then it makes sense if you're making spare parts to actually do exactly the same thing. So you start to look at integrating them because you were going to buy them anyway. It makes sense, but most certainly incorporate antimicrobial materials into all new designs going forward. So I think it's a short-term fix for some things, but it's actually, you've got to look at it from a longer-term fix from another. Okay. And also, it's one of the things that wasn't touched here is cleaning. There's so many different standards around the world. I mean, one of us mentioned it earlier that nothing's joined up in how you actually clean an aircraft and what is actually a true standard. There is a materials hygiene group that's an ad hoc group that's meeting, that's got about 36 members globally that are talking about this, but it's an ad hoc group. It's international, but it's ad hoc. It's been put together by Sekisui plastics people, and hosted by them. But the reality of it is, it's joining everybody up to get what would be classified as a proper standard.
Okay, thanks, Ben. The antimicrobial and standards perspective. I guess, do we have any other comments on how to reduce communal touch points? What the opportunities are?
Yeah, just really quickly. I know we're short on time. I think what this situation will do is actually accelerate the adoption of what I would consider to be just global mega trends in technology, and accelerate their adoption into aerospace. So touchless payment, touchless features. I think that the technology is there. It's been slow to transition into aerospace, but I think this will certainly accelerate that. I buy a coffee now. I don't pull out a wallet. I just show them my phone, and somehow the money changes hands. And so we talk about touchless. It's really frictionless, right? I think a lot of the technologies being developed to support our life will start to find in the cabin for sure. On the antimicrobials, I completely agree. I think antimicrobials materials have a lot of promise. I think the challenge there, or the opportunity, right? So I think the opportunity with antimicrobial materials is, how do we extend their duration, right? So how do we get to a point where we don't need to reapply after every night or every week or what have you, and how can you, I guess, visually indicate that these antimicrobials are present and that they're effective? So a lot of opportunity there. There's hundreds of materials within a cabin, right? Literally hundreds of potential touch points with unique material systems within an aircraft cabin. And cleaning was discussed. So also ensuring that cleaners and the procedures that need to occur are compatible and safe for the materials. Whether it's a liquid cleaner, a lighting-based solution, or any solution that could clean the aircraft. So a lot of opportunities there as well.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, obviously running short on time. I think we'll just talk briefly about the third challenge statement, and then probably call it there. So the third challenge statement is on the topic of cleaning, conveniently. So the statement is: reduce cabin cleaning time by 50% through furniture form and function. I guess that's a combination of effectively design for cleaning, which is probably not the most common engineering requirement. Any thoughts on that?
Well,
maybe if
I also work with a design house for my sins as well on a consultancy basis, and one of the things that is always looked at is crumb catchers. But there was a marvelous statement I heard on a webinar a little while ago by a guy called Matthew Corder, who works for Alaska Airlines, and he turned around and said, maybe we should paint all of the aircraft white inside, and so just like a hospital, so that when somebody gets on the plane, they can actually recognize that it looks clean. I thought it was quite an interesting comment to make from but the reality of it is, all new designs, that will be a feature without a shadow of a doubt, that crumb catchers will be eliminated. So smoother surfaces, transitions, all of the sort of things that very often all of us have got on seats and seen somebody else's cookie that was broken up on the seat behind as you're sitting down. That's got to be eliminated. They're the sort of things that have got to be changed in the designs going forward.
So can I ask David? I've got to ask David before the end. Are we going to be seeing EasyJet painting the inside white?
I don't think we'll be painting it white, but no, completely agree about the crumb catchers. I mean, it's the bane of cabin crews' life, trying to pick out popcorn from cracks in the seats and so on during a turnaround. So anything that can smooth that process out will be welcomed. So yeah, completely agree.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, brilliant. I think I will draw close there. So I just want to say many thanks to all our panelists. Thank you for your time. Obviously, thank you for all our participants for taking part and submitting some very interesting questions. Hope it was very useful. So this session has been recorded. I think we're aiming to make this available to people afterwards. So yeah, many thanks. There is, I hope we're all now on track with all these many links, but if you'd like to go back to the Crowdcast link for the closing session, that'd be great. So yeah, thank you all, and I guess I'll did you farewell there?
Thank you, Reese. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Reese.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.